Everyone looks at the LIV Golf roster and sees rebels. They see guys who took the money and ran, players who claim to be growing the game, while really just padding their bank accounts. The narrative has always been about greed, loyalty, and the disruption of tradition. But there is a much darker reality lurking beneath those nine-figure headlines, one that explains the strange silence coming from the locker rooms. Why hasn't anyone actually left? Rumors have swirled for months about players regretting the jump, missing the prestige of the PGA Tour, or hating the 54-hole format. Yet every single one of them stays. They smile in the interviews. They wear the team logos. They play the part. You might think it's pride. You might think they are simply doubling down on their decision to save face. You would be wrong. The truth is terrifyingly simple. They aren't staying because they want to. They are staying because they physically cannot afford to leave. We aren't talking about simple breach of contract fees here. We are talking about a contractual spiderweb so complex and punitive that it turns massive signing bonuses into debilitating debts and freedom into bankruptcy. It's not loyalty keeping the band together. It's an ironclad exit clause that effectively holds their careers hostage. And what's written in that fine print is far more shocking than the check they cashed on day one. Let's talk about the money, not the money they made, the money they would lose. Most people think a contract breach just means you have to pay back what you were given. In the real world, if you return a leased car early, you pay a fee. But in the world of Saudi-backed sports contracts, the penalties are rumored to be exponential. Multiple insiders and leaked contract details have pointed to something called a multiplier clause. Here's how the math reportedly works. If a player wants to break their contract before the term ends, usually around 2026 or 2027, they don't just owe their signing bonus back. They owe a multiple of it. The prevailing rumor puts this penalty at anywhere from 2 to 4 times the original signing fee. Let that sink in. Take a player like Jon Rahm, who reportedly signed for something in the ballpark of $300 to $500 million. If he woke up tomorrow and decided he missed the history of the PGA Tour enough to quit LIV, he wouldn't just be writing a check for $500 million. Under a 4x multiplier, he could theoretically owe the league nearly $2 billion. It sounds insane because it is. These clauses are designed to be impossible to pay. They aren't just financial deterrents, they are financial death sentences. When these guys signed on the dotted line, they didn't just sell their services for a few years. They essentially took out a mortgage on their own freedom, with interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. But if you think the money is the only chain binding them, take a look in the mirror. For a professional athlete, their face, their name, and their brand are their biggest assets, often worth more than their tournament winnings. In most sports, when you leave a team, you take your brand with you. The team takes down your poster, stops selling your jersey, and life moves on. Not here. LIV contracts reportedly contain a grant of rights clause that is terrifyingly broad. The language suggests that the league retains the rights to use a player's image, likeness, and content created during their tenure in perpetuity. That means forever. Even if a player somehow scrounges up the cash to buy their way out, LIV could theoretically keep using them in promotional materials, documentaries, and advertisements for decades. Imagine quitting a job because you hated the boss, but the company still legally owns the rights to put your face on their billboards for the next 20 years. You become a ghost in your own career, forced to compete against a version of yourself that is still generating revenue for the very people you tried to escape. They didn't just buy a golfer's swing for 4 years. In many ways, they purchased the permanent rights to their legacy. When you sign that paper, you don't just become an employee, you become a product. And products don't get to decide when they are taken off the shelf. The situation gets even messier when you look at the top of the food chain, the team captains. We're talking about the biggest names, the guys running Smash GC, the Crushers, the Fireballs. These players weren't just sold a paycheck, they were sold a franchise. Part of their deal involved equity stakes in their specific teams, with the promise that one day, these teams would be sold for billions, just like NFL or NBA franchises. This was supposed to be their retirement plan, their generational wealth. But in the fine print of corporate equity agreements, there is almost always a bad leaver clause. If a captain walks away or breaches the contract, they don't just lose their salary, they trigger a forced forfeiture of their equity. All that ownership they were promised, it evaporates instantly. So if a captain wants to quit, they aren't just paying back a loan, they are torching a lottery ticket that they were told would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They are stuck in a golden cage of their own making, forced to act as CEOs, recruiters, and cheerleaders for a business model they might not even believe in anymore. They can't just hand in a resignation letter because they aren't just employees, they are partners. And in this league, the only way to dissolve a partnership is to walk away with absolutely nothing. Now, the armchair lawyers out there are probably screaming, "Just sue them! Non-compete clauses get thrown out in court all the time, and in the United States, that is often true. American courts generally hate restrictive covenants that stop a person from earning a living. If this were a dispute in a California or Florida courtroom, a sympathetic judge might look at these penalties, call them unconscionable, and tear the contract up. But the architects of this league were 10 steps ahead. Reports suggest that the governing law for these massive contracts isn't American law at all. The jurisdiction is likely tied to London, specifically arbitration in the UK. This changes the game entirely. Under English law, the sanctity of the contract reigns supreme. The legal philosophy there is much more rigid. If two sophisticated parties, like a grown man and a billion-dollar sovereign wealth fund, agree to terms, the court will enforce them. They don't care if you made a bad deal. They care that you signed it. Furthermore, arbitration happens behind closed doors. There is no public jury to sway with sob stories about growing the game, and there are no cameras to capture the drama. It is a quiet, ruthless process where the contract is the Bible. A player walking into that room isn't fighting for their freedom. They are walking into a slaughter where the only weapon allowed is the document they already signed. They can't rely on the court of public opinion to save them, because the public will never even see the transcript. Let's assume for a moment that a player actually has the billions to pay the exit fee and the stomach to fight the legal battle in London. They still face one final career-ending hurdle: the garden leave. This is a standard corporate tactic weaponized for professional sports. If a player breaches their contract, they are likely hit with a restrictive covenant that bans them from playing professional golf for a rival tour for up to 12 months. In the corporate world, garden leave just means you get paid to sit in your garden and not work for a competitor. It sounds nice, but in professional golf, a year off is a death sentence. The entire ecosystem of the sport relies on momentum and the official world golf ranking. Your ranking is your passport. It's what gets you into the majors, the Masters, the US Open, the Open Championship. It's the only currency that matters for a legacy. If a top player is forced to sit on the sidelines for a full year, their ranking doesn't just dip, it evaporates. They would free fall from the top 50 to the top 1,000, essentially overnight. By the time their non-compete expires, they wouldn't be walking back onto the PGA Tour as a conquering hero. They would be starting from scratch, forced to beg for sponsor exemptions or play in qualifying tournaments just to get a tee time. They would be watching the majors from their couch, not because they are banned, but because they have become statistically irrelevant. Leaving isn't just expensive, it's a guarantee of irrelevance. There was a pervasive arrogance when this exodus started, a quiet belief among the players that if things went south, the PGA Tour would be waiting with a lifeboat, ready to pay their ransom just to get the talent back. That belief was a delusion. The bridge back to the traditional tour isn't just burned, it has been dismantled brick by brick. The idea that Jay Monahan or the tour's new investors would cut a check to cover a $300 million breach of contract fee is laughable. Think about it from a cold, hard business perspective. Why would the PGA Tour shell out a fortune to rescue a traitor who tried to destroy them? They have zero incentive to save the guys who left. In fact, leaving them stranded serves the tour better. It sends a message to the next generation. You can chase the money, but once you cross that line, you are on your own. The players who stayed loyal are already demanding equity and rewards. They certainly wouldn't tolerate the tour using its capital to bail out the competition. So the defectors are stuck in a no man's land. They can't afford to leave LIV, and the PGA Tour isn't offering to buy them out. They are stranded on a financial island with no rescue team coming, and the only ships passing by are the ones they already sank with their own lawsuits and public insults. They locked themselves in the room, swallowed the key, and are now realizing that no one on the outside is interested in breaking down the door to save them. The next time you see a LIV golfer smiling on a podium, holding a giant check, and talking about how great the team atmosphere is, look a little closer. You aren't watching a revolution anymore. You are watching a hostage situation where the hostages are holding the bag. The LIV Exodus everyone talks about isn't happening. Not because the players are happy, but because the door is locked from the outside. They chased the generational wealth, and they got it. But the cost wasn't just their reputation or their world ranking. It was their autonomy. They traded the uncertainty of sport for the certainty of a contract, only to realize that the contract owns them completely. It is the ultimate cautionary tale of the modern era. Be careful what you sell, because you might just find out that the price of buying it back is higher than you can ever afford. So here's the question you need to answer. If you were offered $100 million tomorrow, but it meant signing your freedom away to a corporation that owned your face, your future, and your voice for the next 5 years, would you still take the deal? Or are these players simply victims of their own greed who got exactly what they deserved? Let us know whose side you're on in the comments below. We'll be down there debating the best answers. Thanks for watching.